Psychonauts 2 is a classic platformer and one of my favorite games in the last 5 years.
Extrasensory violation.
Look, I can explain.
Psychonauts 2. Are you excited for the sequel to the original game from 2005? Were you alive at the time it came out? Let's jump into the time-traveling, unraveling machine for a second. 2005 on the original Xbox saw Psychonauts, a classic platforming game that started the story of Raz, a psychic acrobat who runs away from the circus to join a summer camp for kids with gifted abilities. Psychonauts was lauded for its excellent platforming, characterization, and stunningly long sequel development time, even though it didn't sell very well. That brings us to Psychonauts 2 and this review. 2021, it's finally here on August 25th for the Xbox PC, OS X, and Linux. Hit the subscribe button. I would love for you to subscribe. Give it a thumbs up. This is what Edward Scissorhands' Beetlejuice in a 1990s cartoon would look like if somehow three groups could make a delightfully freakish baby. It's not ugly, it's not dog winner award level, but remembering that Psychonauts' so-called humans are led by a character that looks like she put a football in her mouth sideways and just left it there, you should be prepared for what this game offers. I like it. I think the designs are awesome. Scott Campbell's original character designs filtered through Tim Schafer's what the fuck factory of ideas has resulted in a game that looks absolutely gorgeous, even when it's sort of not, and has you staring at the bent and askew shape of a single painting on the wall of a doctor in a shower cap. However, I think it's the facial animations and the weird lifelike emotions that the characters display all the time that is so instantly noticeable in Psychonauts 2. Like Raz's open-eyed stare as he peeks over this dirty counter and discusses someone cooking the Rock's pancake cheat meal with replacement ingredients from random animals and expired foodstuffs, and the growing horror that he has. It starts out pretty enough, but as the levels continue, it gets downright gorgeous. It's not like Ratchet and Clank and that over-the-top graphical sheen. It's like a unique animation, something that doesn't really look like anything else. And even the side characters that aren't the shining star of a scene are indelibly marked on my memory. While Psychonauts 2 doesn't start out with that blistering biosphere of, let's say, Biomutant and its massive draw distances and that marvelous color work, and it's not like that fur bristling and high technology that send 1,000 furries into their bunks like Ratchet and Clank, it's not a wower instantly. What it does do is it offers this bent world that isn't just contained in the warped minds of the people that Raz can leap into, but also the Psychonauts' main base, the landscape around it. It's esoteric, it's weird, it's always surprising you with this mysterious squid creature that kicks you out of the water when you fall into it, or the absolutely crazy design of bosses made out of the outside of a 1970s cranked up cephalopod. Technical wizardry may exist in Psychonauts, but that's not really the game's graphical aim, and it's never in your face. Long draw distances are noticed, but only because at the very peak of the horizon is some floating tongue with warped teeth like it chewed its way out of a Ren and Stimpy cartoon. Artistically, this game speaks to me. The characters' incredibly pronounced designs, as well as the game's use of flatter textures, may not speak to everybody else. Also, it lacks ray tracing and those kind of lighting color effects. It's going to rub some people the wrong way. The first area in particular doesn't do the game really any favors, but after you move out of the first maybe 15 minutes, if you like misfits, the odd, the deeply warped, Psychonauts 2 is going to appeal to you on a very basic level. Also, while the boss designs are awesome, the enemy designs themselves are a little bit more hit and miss. Some are incredible, others are almost relying on an in-joke from the story versus a profound graphical design that makes them appealing or memorable. However, as a package, the entire game's overall look and performance was memorable. The FPS was locked pretty much all the time. Frame counting moments, as well as using software, indicated a lock 60. There are various different versions of this game. I'm going to pop up the display here so you can see. There was a drop or two on a couple loading screens, but a very solid image throughout.
What are you doing, weirdo?
Three days ago, Truman Zanotto, the grand head of the Psychonauts, was kidnapped. Yesterday, with my help, the Psychonauts rescued Truman from the underwater lair of Dr. Loboto.
Whenever you get a game like this that's so unique looking, you always want that audio to match it. And impressively enough, it does for the most part all the way through. Stellar voice work for a stunning number of characters. It comes through in the delivery. Raz, who's voiced by Richard Horvitz, is both comically childlike, or at least adolescent, but at the same time courageous, like when he admits that he deeply failed everyone around him. Richard's always been an excellent voice actor, but backed up by writing like this that takes its time, and I'll get to that in a moment, that work comes through, and it's allowed to shine by all the conversations you can have in Psychonauts 2. It's actually a little bit mind-blowing. It plays almost more like an RPG at times when you spend this much time in the discussions. Backed up by an excellent sidecast, Psychonauts 2 delivers in every level when it comes to the vocals.
Yep.
And this is only matched by the sound work. It's phenomenal. This is where, when the game opens up, you notice a lot of work put in. The wide open far field sounds of reversed flowing rivers, or the open air echo of that first classroom you go into. It's subtle, but it's backed up by comical effects as well as expected ones for the various special powers that Raz and his team have. Cribbed and adjusted from sci-fi expectant sound effects like mind control warbles, this all works incredibly well, and there's a lot of atmospherics going on that you can hear when you play the game. Lastly, the music. It's downright fantastic. It goes from this lighthearted elevator music pumping into the huge auditorium center of that main base to banjos, and jumps into larger orchestral pieces without really missing a beat, and fading and melding perfectly into those sound effects as well. It creates this awesome sonic layer, and it's patterned enough that you don't notice any switching. Each track really delicately reflects a place and a bit of the game world or a boss's main theme, while at the same time never goes so far as to sound out of place. Even the old 1970s James Bond spy movie tracks that you hear. There's something to say about a game that has a stellar thumping soundtrack that gets your blood pumping. Psychonauts 2 soundtrack is far more akin to something like a motion picture, and it fits the gameplay, which we're going to talk about right now.
Using a false identity, we've secured a high roller suite to use as our base of operations.
Raz and his team just came back from the Rhombus of Ruin. That was the game that was on the PSVR, and are returning back after having saved their comrade and also capturing their enemy, only to find the possibility of a spy within their group. Raz not only has to prove himself again to this group, but also has to help them find out who it is that masterminded the whole last adventure. What plays out here reminded me a bit of Harry Potter in theme, and I can't spoil anything, but the plotline delves into enemies of the past, possibly remade, and the secrets and truths and lies people tell each other after tumultuous events. Psychonauts 2 is very platform-centric as a game. Bear that in mind. It is not a shooter and platformer 50-50 in a way that, say, Ratchet is, or even most other games. Combat occurs, it has its place to shine in some levels, but a good deal of Psychonauts is based around platforming and exploration, even some of the powers of which Raz can unlock while exploring and finding collectibles or furthering the story. Almost all of them have to do with exploration and then have a side impact on the combat. Since Raz's power is the ability to jump into people's minds, you can do that, and those levels are strange reflections of the history and the decisions people have made, but it's also still a platformer in there. For example, you may be able to change someone's mind by finding the connection to some event in their past and making them think, oh, hey, I want to change it. And by doing so, you grapple onto their thoughts, or leap across electrified bad memories, or sail over nightmares. Almost everything, though, is in service of the platforming, or in fiction of service to the platforming, and thank God it is, because this is what platforming needed for me. 15 plus hours of probably the most confident in itself game I've seen in a long time. And with things like Crash Bandicoot, the platform genre is wide in presentation. It's usually in the game's pacing, though, that I identify with it. Crash Bandicoot's insanely high difficulty level and Defunct Mountain Dew extreme attitude, or Ori's almost combo rhythm-based exploration. Psychonauts 2's pacing is much more like older classic 3D platformers, with story moments elevated to something you would expect to see in big budget titles like Uncharted. Now, I don't mean that seriously big budget, we'll talk about it in a second, but certainly more than you see in most other games of this kind. Psychonauts deals with all sorts of very adult fare as well. Its whimsy is directly attached to its wisdom and how it tackles them, though. You may leap into a level where you're helping someone deal with horrible decisions in their life, and these amazing comedic moments come out both visually as well as audibly in the banter or the one-liners. Then the game settles down and brings it all back around with this lengthy cutscene. At every turn, Psychonauts adds some new way in which to interact with the world in the gameplay. Not in just the case of, say, taking a rat's mind and seeing what humans look like to them, but also crazy minigames within the levels themselves, which are technically levels inside of another level. While you do have the expected moves for platforming like double jumps and gliding to explore, climbing, rail sliding, and psychic mind attacks, as well as basic moves, combat is not the strong point, and you can tell. While battles play out, you get better as you get more powers. The controls are not amazing for this. You can attach any of your powers to the bumpers and triggers, which is great. Also, changing them out by pushing up on the digital pad is pretty quick. However, in particular moments, like grabbing items around the world to use your psychic telekinesis, the enemies and moving and attacking them is not very smooth. It's a consequence of both having a large number of available powers as well as the lack of real gun-style systems to rely on good aiming. You can go into the targeting system and turn it on or off in the accessibility section, which might make this a little smoother for people, but it never felt really good. The game's pure bliss, though, is in the exploring, both in the warp levels, but also the main world, finding new locations and characters, and odd bits of world lore. While control can be a bit loose, especially jumping between grind rails, which feels like it has a good deal of leg on the inputs and never rears its head for too long. More of the occasional moment that was odd versus, oh my God, I can't play this. There's so many little hidden tidbits across the world as you explore or jump into people's brains and constantly hearing something new. If that's not happening, then you're finding the collectibles or the upgrades. And the upgrade system works pretty well. You can power up Raz's abilities like adding distance to an attack or making a psi power ability radius massive. There's badges, which are basic little Boy Scout field badge designs. They can be added to powers as well as to Raz himself to adjust things like how an ability looks graphically, or if you can interact with some creatures in the game world or otherwise. There's a huge number of those. It's in keeping with Raz, though, being his own person and that bit of individuality, especially as the story does involve his entry into another group that he has to prove himself to. I like that feeling of being a new person in an already established team, and just changing the color of some actual psi effect worked really well. Later on, more expensive pins can dramatically change the gameplay if that's what you want to do, or exist in the N+ game. There's a cerebral catharsis in a game that takes its time and does it well, and in a platformer or a genre that you're not quite expecting that. Momentary diversions of time and desire to go into the action, and more of a desire to actually watch and experience the story, is something I was not expecting in a platformer. Psychonauts 2 nails that. I was actually interested at all times on what these characters were doing and what they were thinking. This does tie back into Psychonauts 1 a couple times, and there, luckily enough, is a what happened last time kind of trailer that you can see that does explain a lot of it, but there is a lot of story here, so be prepared for a couple times where you're like, who was that? And maybe having to look it up. I didn't know exactly what I was going to get with Psychonauts 2. It's had a bit of a troubled development. It had the FIG, and then they ended up paying those guys back. They were bought by Microsoft. You never quite know what you're getting whenever a game takes this long to be made. However, what I got, damn. This is a more sedate platformer than most other titles. Psychonauts 2 hits a spot that I think reminds me of those older 3D platformers, and that's why it is fun to me. The characters are incredible. Platforming is great. Exploration's always engaging. Combat, I didn't love. I don't hate it. I don't think it ruins anything. It's certainly nowhere near the drop that we saw in Biomutant, but it is not necessarily the game's absolute strong point. It does get better in the later part of the game, though, when you get a lot of those different powers. Without spoiling everything, I can just say this game has a friggin' plethora of pure pleasure when it comes to characters. The voices, the acting, and the highlights are the goddamn game that can just have excellent writing like this. So anyway, as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system, and you can tell this is obviously a game I think you should get. Fucking fantastic, man. Like, this is, I mean, it's basically good writing in games like this is so rare. Platformers that have writing like this can be counted on two hands in all the years of gaming. So here, have another hand, because Psychonauts adds to that. That's it. I don't really have anything to add. A bit astonished at how much I enjoyed this. I'll be interested to see if anybody else did, because, you know, you're not allowed to talk to anybody while you're reviewing a game. Maybe other people hated it. I just don't give a shit. Anyway, that's it for me. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike the video, give it a thumbs down. If you got any questions, put them in the comments. If you want to say something, put it in the comments. Follow me on Twitter. Peace out.